Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. Nigeria declared a security emergency, began expanding its armed forces, approved 20,000 new police recruits, and moved security officers from VIP protection to conflict areas, all before the defense minister resigned abruptly. What should Nigeria do next in 2026 to strengthen its security progress? TotalEnergies sold its 12.5% stake in OML 118. Shell and Nigerian Agip acquired portions. Petrol prices fell and daily consumption rose to 31.8% to 56.7 million litres. Crude output slightly dipped to 1.58 million barrels per day. How will falling petrol prices and higher consumption affect Nigeria's energy sector next year? Cyril Ramaphosa rejected Donald Trump's claims that South Africa manhandled the G20 presidency, threatened exclusion from the G20 summit, and persecuted white citizens, calling the accusations false. He confirmed a proper handover at the Johannesburg meeting and noted continued U.S. business and civil society engagement. How could diplomatic tensions affect South Africa's economic partnership in 2026? Joining us today for further insight is Seyi Owojulube, a policy analyst. Welcome, Seyi, to the podcast.
Very much for having me.
Thank you. A lot has been happening in the past week in Nigeria, in our security um ecosystem, if I kind of put it that way. We have seen the Nigerian government respond to the outcry of the security crisis that Nigeria has been facing. The Nigerian government declared a security emergency in Nigeria. It started expanding its armed forces. It approved new recruits for the Nigerian police. We also saw VIP protection, that's Nigerian forces, police who were put with VIPs being removed and taken to conflict areas. And we also saw a big one this week where the defense minister resigned on health reasons. There's so much going on, and we've had like a new minister of defense sworn in. He has had his screening by the Senate, I think yesterday. But Nigeria is going through a lot, and we're seeing the government also respond. All this is coming from when we saw Donald Trump declaring Nigeria as a country of concern, and then we're seeing the government react. We've also seen the Nigerian delegation visit the US. What are your thoughts on what is happening, the first steps that the government is taking, and what do you think that the Nigerian government needs to take seriously and continue doing, especially as we move into 2026?
Well, as you summarized, a lot has definitely been happening, and one thing that every Nigerian can attest to is the government is finally giving security the attention that it needs. Before now we've been having these conversations and it's been reported in the media from time to time about the successes or otherwise that the government has recorded against terrorism. But now what we have found out is that since Nigeria's designation as a country of but the Donald Trump action in the US, security issues have become part of the daily conversation in Nigeria. They are no longer numbers. And speaking of what the first steps that the government has already taken, you mentioned the government's announcement or the president's announcement that all police officers attached to VIPs be withdrawn and redeployed, right? These things, these steps that the government has taken can only help in the short term, but they're not enough to solve the deep and long, should I say long-standing or long-term security problems that Nigeria has faced. And so why did I say that they can only work in the short term? It's that in the short term, this directive by the president, it immediately boosts the capacity, right? It increases the numbers of soldiers or police officers that we have available, who are available to attend or to confront the security challenges. We've also heard that the government has directed the recruitment of more police officers, which has been something that I remember in the last election, the presidential candidate of the PDP, Atiku Abubakar, made that as one of his campaign promises that he would recruit police officers. So yes, this recruitment of soldiers and police officers and the withdrawal of the police officers that attached to VIP immediately boosts the number of police officers and security officials that we have available to tackle these security issues. It also gives the administrators, that's the security administrators, enough capacity to focus on areas where violence, where you have the high rate of violent occurrences. However, the reason that it falls short of a long-term change or a long-term solution is that we're only having quantity without these people going through the necessary long-term training and even logistics and intelligence training that is needed to build a formidable security force, right? So, and in the instance, one thing that we've always mentioned is the fact that the Nigerian military is stretched by taking on routine policing duties, by standing at checkpoints, all of these things. Those are some of the long-term security issues that Nigeria needs to face, needs to address. And at the heart of it, it's that the root causes of these security challenges that stem from ethnic conflicts, grazing conflicts between farmers and the nomadic herdsmen, youth unemployment, even light weapons trafficking. Those are the root causes of this security challenge that we currently face in Nigeria. So recruiting more police officers will work, yes, in the short term, but on a long-term basis, there's still a lot more to be done.
I do agree with you that, a lot needs to be done, but I also want to ask you, how effective do you think these emergency security measures are? I know you spoke about it, but you said in the long term, it would only be for the short term, right? But for in the long term, what can the Nigerian government do? Um, we see the resignation of the Minister of Defense. We see the, immediate appointment of another minister. This abrupt change in ministers, do you think that it also poses a threat for continuity and implementations of some of the security reforms that are already in place? Do you think it takes Nigeria like a step back in our security, or do you think that this new minister would make a difference and would, kind of change things coming from his background, especially as a military officer who was also a chief of defense staff. What do you think he would do I think as a minister that would be different from what he did as, when he was a chief of defense staff?
Well, what he will do, starting off from where you ended your question, what he will do remains to be seen. Right, but to address your question, it's that yes, there's going to be sort of a change. We expect to see sort of a change in the performance of the security agencies, whether good or bad remains to be seen, right? But with the change of hands at the defense in the defense minister's office, is that the new minister may have a different set of priorities than the previous minister. Issues like issues that border around coordination between the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Defense Ministry. Issues around coordination between these ministries would normally be slow during this transition period. So those are some of the cons that we can expect or that we anticipate will come up. So a bit of momentum will be lost at a time like this when uh, also it's that usually the defense minister or the office of a bridge, right? A civilian bridge between the armed forces and the presidency or the National Assembly, as we may put it. So I'm sure that the defense minister, would also need some time to settle in, acting as a civilian compared to when he was in service, right? And if you watched his screening yesterday, or anyone who followed the screening yesterday would attest to the fact that the minister himself alluded to it, that the last time he was at the National Assembly, he came in as an officer, and now he's coming in as a civilian. So that also speaks to the momentum that I said would be lost, a bit of momentum that would be lost, because this is a transition period. So the minister would try to settle in. It has to learn how to work with the bureaucracy of public service or of civil service. And then he would need to also get his priorities as regards, because now he's no longer just uh from the military, he's no longer just an army officer, right? He has a broader portfolio to attend to, and he must juggle all these balls, so to speak, to make sure that he doesn't fail or disappoint on either one of all what he has to juggle. So at a time like this, we would expect that, as I said earlier, there will be a bit of drop in momentum, but we expect that things would improve, and we hope that things would improve going forward.
I mean, hopefully, with what we're seeing with the security architecture, the changes being made, there will be a positive change, and would see the Minister of Defense work hand in hand to address some of the situations that we're facing as well. I mean, so for me, I'm thinking that since he also comes from the military background, it would also be like a plus for him, because then he has experienced the field and understands all the tactical things there. And then now he coming to be a minister again would, give him, I think it's a better flavor for him because he has like double experience from both sides. But let's see what comes up. Let's move on to our second story where we see Total selling its stake um in OML. What do you think is the reason for selling its stake, and what impact do you think this would have on domestic oil production, investment, and revenue for Nigeria as well?
Well, these things come has been coming on quite frequently, especially towards the tail end of the Buhari administration, where we saw some international oil companies offload some of their assets to other people or other entities. But as regarding OML 118, it's quite a significant one, because that is the Bonga oil field And the Bonga oil field traditionally has been one of Nigeria's most historically has been one of Nigeria's most important offshore assets. It's been reported to produce over 1 billion barrels of crude oil since startup. So the new operation will we hope would maintain or even boost production output or oil output from that well or from that field. As it stands now, Shell Nigeria, SNEPCO, with this sale, has increased its holding in OML 118 from 55% to 67.5%. And they've already signaled that they are still committed to deep water production in Nigeria, right? So, and as part of that, as part of the development plans that they have mentioned for Bonga North, they said that they are committed to also exploring the Bonga North, which is like a subsea tieback in the OML 118 license area. So yeah, we hope that it would ensure this sale would ensure continuity of production. So whatever output shocks or potential output shocks that might come up from the abrupt exit of the previous owners, we expect that SNEPCO can quickly cover up in that area and even maybe support a ramp up in production from um, that field or from that mining license if other wells around that area like Bongan or not proceeds as planned.
So we're also seeing that you're seeing our consumption increase, daily consumption of petrol for Nigerians, but we're also seeing the prices also falling. How might our increased petrol consumption affect Nigeria's refining capacity and energy infrastructure, especially with next year?
Well, in the early days of subsidy removal, what we said or what analysts likened it to was sort of like the telco situation where in the early days, SIM cards sold for as high as 20,000 or 40,000. And now you can get SIM cards for 200, 500 naira. In some instances, it's even free. You just have to buy some recharge card on it to activate the card. And so, yes, in the long term, we're not saying that petrol will become ridiculously cheap, but what we'll find is that as refining capacity increases, and not just from the Dangote refinery, even though Aliko Dangote has announced plans to double the refining capacity of the refinery, but as we see other refineries come up or expand, we have the likes of the Walter Smith refinery. We also have the state refineries which are currently shut at the moment, but if they come on board and refining capacity increases, we can expect slightly lower petrol prices, more than what we currently see. But let's not forget that that's dependent on the international price of crude oil. However, what happens is that if our production, if our consumption, petrol consumption, I mean now, continue to increase without refining capacity increasing alongside, it then puts pressure on the already existing refineries to catch up or to meet up, right? And if, for instance, the Dangote refinery operates at below 70% capacity utilization, it means that Nigeria might still have to rely on imports, as we already saw from the data that Nigeria is still importing to some extent refined petrol. Now, it also means that any shutdown or any incident at the Dangote refinery would immediately trigger a nationwide scarcity. And one other thing would be that as our petrol consumption increases, we should expect to see more trucks, more tankers on the road. Already, the government has banned the 65,000 capacity tankers from being on the road because of the many accidents that we've seen, resultant loss of lives. So, given that our pipeline network isn't so advanced, we should expect to see more trucks on the road because they would need to keep up with petrol consumption. So this is sort of like the both sides of the picture on the effects of increasing petrol consumption.
Okay. And into our final story, in South Africa, where there's kind of like I mean, for over a while, there's been tension with South Africa and America. We've seen the tension bureau from Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made certain allegations against South Africa, and recently during the G Summit, and he has spoken against how South Africa handled the G Summit, G20 presidency. Do you think this tension would affect and have like an impact with the relationship that South Africa and the US had, most especially when it comes to trade and investment?
Um, Certainly, this tension, this diplomatic tension between the US and South Africa has been going on for a while. I think even from the start of the Donald Trump administration, when people initially said, I share some of that to Musk, but right now we've seen that this has even gotten worse with how the G20 summit turned out, right? So, speaking as to the impacts or its effects on trade, South African companies have historically enjoyed duty-free access to US markets under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, right? So many South African exports like agriculture, manufactured goods have had enjoyed a competitive advantage, so to speak, in US. So this tension could now cause South African producers to face higher costs while trying to enter the US market. So if, for instance, the Trump administration withdraws the AGOA benefits, it would result in reduced demand for it could result in reduced demand for South African goods, and this would have a negative impact on export-dependent sectors in South Africa, resulting in job losses, especially in manufacturing and in agriculture. And overall, it could also result in declining export revenue for South Africa, right? Another thing is that it could reduce foreign direct investment in South Africa, especially from the US markets or from US investors, and dampen investor confidence. And so, because people will naturally try to stay away and try to protect their investments. So, if South Africa and the US are at loggerheads, it's only natural that investors would look elsewhere to more stable environments or to countries that enjoy a better diplomatic relationship with the US for their investments.
But going forward, what do you think the Cyril Ramaphosa's government can do to, bridge this tension and, prevent some of the things that you have pointed out from happening? How can they mend their relationship to a point where it doesn't seem to affect the countries?
Well, when you started out and you were talking about Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern, you
Yeah.
mentioned also that the Nigerian government sent a delegation to the US. So one thing that the South African government can do is to sort of repair, like diplomatic repairs, right? Because every country or every government, they have this is what the ambassadors are for. So the South African government can definitely try to start to repair this relationship, right? They could also explore the angle of presenting a unified front, which was what we saw that happened with Nigeria when that designation happened. The Nigerian government and even independent analysts were all speaking to help the US administration or the Trump administration understand that it's not just about a Christian genocide, it's a broader and deeper insecurity problem, right? So the South African government can come up and speak with one voice and help, address those concerns or those allegations that the Trump administration has already put out, address each of it and help the Trump administration understand what exactly is going on in the country. Another thing that they can do is to directly relate to investors, allay their fears, and um, continue talking, keep the talking lines open, keep the communications lines open. One more thing they can do is to then look out to other countries, not just the US now, but to diversify its trade partners and its exports portfolio so that non-US investors can also find the South African economy attractive. The South African economy is structured to a large extent. So if they can leverage that and even leverage the AFCFTA to build to build and show up their export links or their export lines, it would mean that whatever market or revenue they would lose from the US, if the AGOA benefits are withdrawn, they can quickly leverage other non-US investors, non-US allies to plug those holes that may come up from that. But really, it's about presenting a unified voice. It's about also trying to repair that relationship with the US because we cannot underestimate the impact of the US in the global economy.
Thank you very much, Shay, for joining us on today's episode of the podcast. It was so enlightening having you on this episode.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe if you are yet to, like, share, and drop your comments. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates shaping the African continent.